and have never been to the SCMH, I just want to put this 1 or 2 slides out before we start. The good place to start would be the IAQG.org. You see SCMH at the top and IAQG tools. Both places will take you to the SCMH to learn more. As far as how the webinars are laid out, many people ask during the course of the webinars, where can I find them? So once you're in the SCMH, you see SCMH topics. You have the process lifecycle across, for example, plan and manage. Then you have all the topics under plan and manage. Within a particular topic, once you open that up, you'll see core guidance and toolbox guidance, and the toolbox for all the templates and things like that that are available for every topic. Above those two, you'll see if the topic has a webinar, it will be placed there. So you'll see a recording. It'll take you to our YouTube channel where you'll be able to see that webinar again later and share it with your supply base and so on. So at this point, I just would like to introduce Ricardo Martinez from the Boeing Company, and he is going to take over the presentation at this point. And take it away, Ricardo.
Thank you, Sue. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Sue. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I think this is a relevant topic that we need to talk about. My name is Ricardo Martinez. I work for the Boeing Company in the Supplier Quality Organization, and I had the privilege to collaborate with industry peers from all over the world some years ago to develop the SCMH guidance material on acceptance authority media. And so let's start here. Let me see if I can. Oh, there it is. Back. Okay, so during the past decade, we have seen multiple cases from different industries in which someone did not document a true fact and passed a defect, accepted a failed test, or just did not even completed an activity as supposed to, right? If you do a web search for could be falsification of records, or could be failed records from a company, or you will see that there are multiple examples. And as you can see here, we have examples from the automotive industry, from steel and mining, food and drugs, and something in common of all of these different issues are that someone did not document it correctly something, right? Customers, users were impacted by that specific failure, right? The reputation of a company and even a country, as it's shared here, were affected, and there was liability. There's an example of a small company in which it specifically says that a QA officer plead guilty in falsifying tests, and there could be a sentence of up to 5 years in jail. So this is something that it's happening in the world, and the aviation, aerospace, and space and defense industry is not an exception. So this is the relevance of acceptance authority media, how to prevent having something like this. So today, we're going to talk about acceptance authority media. What is acceptance authority media and the different types of AAM? Why managing AAM is important, and some process recommendations, including controls, internal audit, and oversight. There's some sources of the requirement, where does it come from, and some common nonconformances and consequences, and we will have some time to to answer questions. Okay. So what is acceptance authority media? Commonly known as stamping, acceptance authority media is how an organization documents the status of its products and services throughout its life cycle. This requires a documented procedure, controls, and evidence that the organization complies with acceptance authority media requirements. Let's talk about the types of acceptance authority media. As I mentioned some minutes ago, every organization defines how to document the completion and acceptance of an activity, a process, a product, and as the writing team discussed years ago, there could be different forms to accomplish this. So at that time, we identified 5 most commonly used types of acceptance authority media. This could be stamps, which I believe these are the most common use, which is basically a physical device used to print an image. And something to consider is that every stamp should be unique in shape for each specific activity and should have unique identification for each individual. And this is relevant in the control of AAM. Some organizations have implemented an operator self-verification program, for example, and it is important to differentiate the stamp used by an individual who is performing an activity to the stamp used by an individual who has the authority to accept its own work, as inspectors, as different processes within the organization. Also, we identified at that time electronic signatures. It's something that is being used by organizations, passwords, and other tools such as a badge, which could contain a code bar, a chip, magnetic band, which is used to access a system and also to process either a signature or a password, digital signature or a password. And also we have organizations which are still using a personal signature or personal initials. Now, all the different types of AAM have something in common that require a procedure to control them. Now let's talk about the types of AAM controls. So basically, the organization has to answer some questions in order to determine how to control AAM. Who owns, for example, a stamp? Is the stamp being used? Is the individual holding that stamp, that electronic signature, qualified to do that? Are electronic signatures being properly used? So as we move forward in the control of AAM, it is important to understand that no matter or regardless of the type of AAM defined by the organization, all of them require specific controls, right? And require internal audit and oversight. So why managing acceptance authority media is important? So first of all, it's a requirement for all 9100 certified organizations. And the application of AAM to retain documented information is a personal warranty that a task was completed as scheduled, as planned, and when performed. So again, this is relevant because the individual who holds a stamp it's stating that they completed this activity as it was, as I mentioned, as scheduled, as planned, and when performed. And also discussed by the team some years ago, most of the times an acceptance authority media failure is in fact a direct cause of any non-conformance escape. Someone did not verify, someone did not complete it as scheduled, as planned, and when performed an activity, and that could have allowed a non-conformance to escape. And failure to perform a planned and authorized task could also result in a quality management system or product escape. So as you can see, the proper use of acceptance authority media is not only important, it is critical. Okay. To understand the relevance of acceptance authority media in the industry, we need to understand where does the requirement comes from and why organizations need to implement proper controls. So AAM requirements requirements come from internal standards, contractual requirements, and especially regulations. So customers could flow down specific requirements and contractual verbiage related to the use and control of acceptance authority media. This could be in different forms by the implementation of specific programs, specific controls, right? And also regulatory agencies could have specific requirements for the use and control of documented information and acceptance authority media. We have here 4 examples of regulatory requirements: FAA Part 21, CCAR Part 21 as well, EASA Part 21, and JCAP Part 3. So all of these regulatory requirements have something in common. They all talk about falsification of records. And when the team, the writing team was developing this guidance material, we all agree that at the end, if we identified a violation to AAM requirements from a regulatory perspective, it could be interpreted as falsification of records, as the fact that happened that someone did not use their acceptance authority media properly, regardless if it was a mistake, if it was an omission. At the end, the record that will remain in time has an issue, which could be, as I mentioned, interpreted as a falsification of a record. So that's why it is really important to implement proper controls for acceptance authority, for the use of acceptance authority media. Now, regarding the linkage to the 9100 standard series, there are specific requirements for the use of AAM. 8.5.2 identification and traceability. Organizations are required to establish controls for acceptance authority media, right? And we also have references in other sections. Section 8.1.2 in configuration management and section 8.6 release of products and services. And also in the 9162 Aerospace Operator Self-Verification Programs Standard, Section 3.1, Acceptance, and Section 6.3, Training and Competence of Identified Operators. So now let's talk about some minimum recommended considerations when implementing an acceptance authority media procedure. So the organization's procedure should reference tools used by the organization to control acceptance authority media. For example, an ERP module, spreadsheets, the templates for the spreadsheets, for let's say a stamp log, right? Database software. During the development of this guidance material, we identified organizations who have developed their own customized database software to control their stamps, their electronic signatures, even personal signatures or initials. Also related documented process for maintenance and control of acceptance authority media. As I mentioned, a stamp log, training log, and qualification records. There are some specific activities that require retraining every cycle. Let's say an operator self-verification program requires retraining of certified operators. So that will need to be included or linked to the organization's acceptance authority media procedure. Also, a list of AAM unique identification codes associated to each individual name. As I mentioned, for example, the stamps. The organization needs to identify who is the owner of each stamp. So every time it is being used, the individual who used it can be identified just by looking at the record. List of AAM authority levels per identification codes, qualification requirements, relevant dates, for example, qualification and training recertification, health test, for example, a vision or color blindness, and other requirements. Also, physical types of AAM require an example of physical stamp image and description. Usually in a stamp log, you will see an example of the stamp, for example, the shape, the color, also handwritten signature, initials. Even that is not the most commonly used practice to use a handwritten signature or initials. During the development of this guidance material, we were able to identify some examples of a handwritten signature log in which we saw a signature, a name, and that's how these organizations were controlling that type of acceptance authority media. Also, electronic types of AAM, electronic database, should be integrated to the ERP system to ensure the transaction validity. So we also identified organizations which have their planning and all of the different activities performed by the individuals working at that organization were controlled through a ERP system. So in most of the cases, the person who is working on a specific activity has access to that system, and they use either a password, electronic signature, they could use a badge, right, to document the completion of that activity. So some minutes ago, we talked about a personal warranty. What does that mean? So critical to AAM process is ensuring that those who are executing the process understand the value of their AAM. When someone signs, stamps, approves, or releases an activity, they are stating that the task was done accurately and completely to the best of their ability in accordance with all procedures and work instructions. So inappropriate use of AAM can result in falsification of documentation, which may violate laws, and the company should ensure that the holder of AAM have appropriate authority to stop work if there are issues and bring them to the attention of supervision. Again, this is really important to consider. If someone is looking at an issue which does not allow them to complete an operation, they should have the proper authority to stop the work, to raise their hand and bring the attention of their supervisors or even management in some cases, right? Because at the end, if an individual signs off is if they stamp, if they approve, if they release an activity, they are stating that it was complete as planned, as scheduled, and at that specific moment. So this specific slide is contained in the tools in the SCMH. We have a template for training, so you can download this material and customize it to your organizations with your organization's logo, and you can use this material as well. And I think this is important to share with all of your employees, that they are aware that AAM is personal warranty, and it's a statement of completion of their work. Some what we call golden rules on the proper use of acceptance authority media. So these are some recommendations for the people who holds a stamp, a signature, who is completing and documenting the completion of work. If you are not sure the item is acceptable, do not use your AAM authority to indicate it is. If the documented information within the QMS does not account for out-of-sequence work, do not skip the planned operations. If the manufacturing plan calls out operations no longer perform or perform in a different manner, request a revision or do not indicate acceptance. If the manufacturing plan calls out tooling or equipment not used, request a revision or do not indicate acceptance. As you can see, some of these might be obvious, but in a manufacturing environment on a daily basis, it could be very easy for someone to just complete the documentation, let's say at the end of a sequence, even that there are some operations that are not longer valid, or if a tool is being used different to the tooling, the fixture call out in the planning. So it is really important to share this information with employees, so they are aware that specifically what is called in the planning, what is called in the router, the work order, that's what they are supposed to be doing, and that they need to document the completion of each specific activity as it was planned and scheduled. So now let's talk about internal audit and oversight. So the control of acceptance authority media is not only looking at a planning, a job order to verify that an operation was stamped. It's not limited to that. So from a QMS perspective, we need to verify that the organization documented information related to AAM complies with the internal process. The organization's leadership and commitment for AAM. If we have an issue related to acceptance authority media, we need to make sure that management, that leadership is aware of that issue, right? And that the appropriate measures have been taken to address that specific issue. We need to verify that the organization's AAM control process meets and complies with the internal requirement. We're talking about the databases, stamp logs, training, and obviously employees' performance and compliance. So as part of the AAM, the organization's AAM process and procedures, the guidance material contains some recommendations to consider internal audit and oversight specific activities, right? To ensure that the organization's AAM process complies to the requirement. So these are some minimum recommended requirements for a documented process to perform internal audit and oversight, to determine roles and levels of and responsibilities of auditors, determine a frequency of internal audit activity, conduct verification of proper management of AAM database, information up to date, non-conformances. Again, if an organization is using physical stamps, well, the organization needs to conduct the verification that the records, that the stamp log is up to date. Also recommended by the team is to maintain documented evidence of internal audit and oversight, and documented evidence of any corrective action taken to address non-conformances. And some recommended practices for the audit and oversight activity: interview individuals applying acceptance authority media practices regarding their competence and awareness of the meaning of their acceptance. Audit the completed work orders for AAM application errors, for example, omissions, typos, legibility. Reviewing work in process work orders to ensure that AAM application is accomplished in a timely manner. Assess, retain documented information on work orders and training records to ensure that no AAM application misrepresentation occurs. And we'll talk about AAM application errors and violations in a moment. And review training course material and records to ensure that AAM application training adequately communicates subjects such as ethics, cultural awareness, and proper use of acceptance authority media. So at the end, as I mentioned, with the slide of QMS and how to approach AAM internal audit and oversight, it's not this activity, the control is not only limited to the actual stamping or application of AAM, but it has to be with a holistic approach to make sure that the entire organization, from a QMS perspective, as I mentioned, is compliant to AAM requirements. So again, some types of acceptance authority media, different types of acceptable media used by the organizations, electronic controls, and physical controls. So for electronic controls, we have electronic signatures, passwords, or a badge, biometric data, and also physical controls, physical stamps, handwritten signature, initials, and even physical fingerprints. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is available SCMH guidance material on acceptance authority media, is section 3.12. So we have core guidance material and a toolbox with different templates, a suggested checklist to control AAM, a stamp control form, a stamp control log, a procedure template to facilitate the development and implementation of a procedure, and a training template. So in here, we are including a stamp control form, which is a this form here. Something that we found during the development of this guidance material is that most of the organizations, when a stamp or a signature is granted to an individual, the person who receives that mean of acceptance authority media signs an acknowledgement letter or an acknowledgement form, which basically is how the training, the training related the proper application of AAM it's completed. So each individual signs that awareness form to make, and the organization makes sure that that individual understands the responsibility of holding a stamp or a signature, and that the individual understands that it's the use of AAM, it's a personal warranty. So all of these forms and templates are available in the SCMH. And let's talk about common nonconformances and consequences. So the team identified 4 different types of violations of AAM. These are also called out in section 7.8.2, compliance education. And these are identified as unintentional, situational, optimizing, deliberate violations. So we group the different violations of AAM in these 4 sections. Errors these could be omissions, typos, liabilities, or wrong fields, right? When an individual uses a different field or a different block to document something. Untimely use, documentation is not complete as planned. One of the recommendations that we hear in most organizations is stamp or sign as you go. A good example is someone who is working, and at the end of the shift, they take the planning and they stamp every single blank space, right, to complete or to document as complete every single operation. So that's also another common nonconformance. Misrepresentation, uncertified or unauthorized personnel, falsification of records, of documentation, or work not performed as planned. And we're not just talking about deliberate violations or unlawful use of AAM. We're talking about individuals who lost a qualification or a certification, right? An individual who is not longer part of an operator self-verification program and is still using its stamp to accept work, right? And the last one could be identified as training deficiencies. And we're talking about ethics, cultural awareness, proper use of authority media, application of authority media is a personal warranty, etc. So in training deficiencies, when someone sees something that it's not, and that individual is not completely sure that it can be accepted, instead of raising their hand or requesting the assistance of a supervisor, they stamp it or accept it anyway. So that could be also identified as training deficiencies. Let me here. What are the consequences? I think this is also included in the guidance material. So consequences of non-compliance includes the following categories: increased cost, quality escapes, product liability, loss of employment, loss of company reputation, civil fines and penalties, regulatory actions, criminal prosecution, personal injury, and loss of life. And as a highly regulated industry, governments have taken action to address violations to in this case, criminal penalties for knowingly falsifying aviation manufacturing quality records. And here are some examples of what is the consequence from a government, as a government response. For example, a parking stall in which there was a knowingly falsifying record. There could be an individual's fine, that there could be individual's imprisonment and a company fine. So as you can see, I mean, it's not just limited to an escapement. The improper use of acceptance authority media is not limited to just an escapement or affecting a customer. It has an impact even from a regulatory perspective. So in summary, establishing controls for acceptance authority media is a requirement for all 9100 standard series certified organizations. The application of acceptance authority media to retain documented information is a personal warranty that a task was completed as scheduled, as planned, and when performed. While it may not likely be the root cause of nonconformance or escape, an acceptance authority media failure mode is in fact a direct cause of any nonconformance escape, and failure to perform a planned and authorized task could result in a QMS and product escape. And again, thank you very much for joining today. Sue.
Yes, thank you, Ricardo. That was great. I think you answered so many questions right up front during your presentation that we don't have many, but I do have one that looks pretty important. Is a procedure mandatory for AAM?
It is a requirement. It is a 9100 requirement, and the requirement calls for controls of acceptance authority media. So I think it could be interpreted as yes.
I don't see any other questions coming in now. If anybody does have a question, if you can go to the Q&A box and type that in, I'll stand by for 1 minute and see if any pop up. Is there anything you'd like to mention, Ricardo, other than the response to that last question? Or if this is good, we can end the webinar. Like I said, I'm just killing a little time. Oh, here comes one. Where can we get a copy of this presentation? Well, I can take that. The presentation, if we remember, and I'll try to go back to the slide here. I'm not sure which one it is, but I'm going to take this time while other people might be typing in their question. If you remember that slide you showed, oh, went too far back. Let me get it. Right here. So when you go to the SCMH, IAQG.org, you will find the 3.12 Acceptance Authority Media. And the plan is that the presentation itself will go in here under the toolbox. And then the webinar, of course, we're going to review the webinar, make sure the recording came out right and everything looks good. And then if that's all acceptable, then we will put that right here under webinar. Okay. I believe I showed that at the beginning as well. If you're not familiar with the APQP information, you would see it here. So right here, there's webinars. All these webinars are available for APQP, Advanced Product Quality Planning. And then, of course, their core guidance in the toolbox. All right, so I'm going to go back to the summary for a minute. And I do have a couple more slides to share with you after I ask this next question. In your opinion, with is the most effective type of AAM, the one easier to manage? So Ricardo, that question is to you. In your opinion, what is the most effective type of AAM and the one easier to manage?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on the organization's QMS, right? I don't think that there's an easy answer for that question. I mean, if the organization has a an ERP system and everything is in a digital format, it should have all of the different controls to just add an additional, let's say, module related to AAM, right? If it has a process, a documented a control for documentation, which is physical, a stamp log, and yeah, I don't think that there's an easy answer to that. It depends on the organization's QMS and the ability to add a another or an extra process, and how. Yeah, there's no easy answer for that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and it's okay. And I think I saw it a little slightly different too. It's talking about whether, is a stamp, an electronic stamp versus a physical stamp on the documentation, controlling the stamps versus controlling electronically. So yeah, it's what your system is capable of, and what makes it easier for the company itself to control. How often
If
are?
the
Oh, go
organization,
ahead.
yes, if the organization has the ability to implement an electronic or digital system to control AAM, I think that could be a good option, right? Paperless. You mitigate the risk of having someone lose their stamp or misrepresentation. It maybe an electronic system could be a good way to control AAM. However, it will have its own challenges, right? Yeah,
Sure,
but
yeah,
it depends on
true.
the organization's QMS.
Okay. How often are the training sessions provided by the company to keep their employees updated?
On AAM, I will say that when it could be as part of the onboarding process of a new hire, once a year, probably a refresher on AAM, right? But every time that an individual receives or is granted the authority to perform an activity, to complete an operation, to every time they receive, let's say, a new responsibility, I think that could be a good opportunity to provide a AAM training or a refresher. There are some specific requirements for example, operator self-verification programs require retraining on a yearly basis, or every time that the organization considers that needs to provide that recertification or retrain individuals. Um, we have, during the development of this guidance material, we talk about training, and some organizations, what they do is they provide like awareness, let's say, could be messages or alerts, in which they don't provide like a general training to every single employee in the organization, but they provide, let's say, like a visual aid or a reminder, right? So it depends again on the organization. So at least it has to be part of the onboarding process of a new hire.
Okay. And if anybody out there has any last minute questions, you can go ahead and pop them in there. I'll check back one more time. I am just going to go. Oh, I do have a couple more. What do you think of using latest technologies, blockchain for AAM?
That's a good question. I will think that blockchain could be the use of blockchain could be more appropriate for configuration control. At the end, as in the process, in the build sequence, as the operation that was completed is not going to change, right? The use of a blockchain could be challenging, right? You will need a lot of processing power to maintain in this case, the blockchain, and start adding layers to the ledger, right? So I don't think that for the application of AAM could be how you say it. I don't think that the application could be as effective as for let's say configuration control. But it's a good question. We might want to look at that.
Yes, and I believe we're looking at that too in some new guidance that we're creating right now outside of this topic. But yes, we are looking into blockchain, for example. We use digital signature via Adobe PDF, requiring user login for C of C signature. Do you think this is sufficient control of AAM? I hope this may help others to find a method also.
Well, if you have the appropriate controls, I think yes, it is sufficient. I mean, there could be as in other types of AAM with the proper controls, the right oversight. I mean, you are mitigating the risk of having an issue with AAM, right? Every type of AAM has its own challenges, but yes, I think that's a good way an appropriate way to use AAM.
Right. It's not without risk, but if it's controlled properly and people are
Yes.
following the rules, it is good. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Operator self-verification also comes under the purview of AAM, right? Not just QA inspection.
Yes.
Yes, I agree. How long are the records kept? Sort of a QMS question, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it depends on the requirements of your organization, customer,
regulatory body.
Regulatory. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And something important. I mean, when someone accepts or documents a completion of an operation, that becomes part of a quality record or a build record. So yeah, it has to be controlled by your organization's procedure on document control.
Yeah, whether it be paper or electronic.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go through a couple quick slides and I'll check back, like I said before, if some more questions come in. So I just wanted to pass along to everyone attending today that we try to hold 3 or 4 webinars a year. We may increase that as we now have worked out through the system. And I apologize to any of you who attempted to come on October 6th and was unable to get into the meeting. I think we've worked out all the kinks. And we have another one that we believe we may do next month. It's called Business Continuity Management. As soon as we know the date, we'll pop that in the announcement page of the SCMH, and we'll also send out an invitation to everyone as we did for this one. So again, I showed you where the webinars are located. I showed you where the PowerPoints of this presentation will end up in the toolbox. I also have one on the structure of the SCMH webinar, the very first one we did, I believe in September. And we're going to put that on the About page since it covers all of them. So here's the announcement page where I let you know that the webinar will show up. So you'll see that in advance, or it'll stay published all the way to the date that we have the webinar. And then again, as I just pointed out, the About page is a good place to start if you're trying to show some customers what this is about, suppliers what this is about, or employees where they may get some supporting guidance and templates such as what Ricardo has pointed out for tools and checklists and forms, things that we think people might be able to use and make their own. So you'll see the topics list, you'll see a communication pack, the alphabetical list of the topics that are available right now, and what's new. So when I publish something new, I think I'm going to be publishing next week, business continuity management materials. That'll pop up into the what's new box. Okay, and you can also do a search of the SCMH. So if there's a topic like I know that they told me about AAM or Acceptance Media Authority. You can just type that word in here and it'll bring up all of, not only the titles where it might be the main topic, but it'll bring up any of the text within, or any documents that contain text with those words in it as well. Okay. And finally, as I check back to see if there's any more questions, just want to let everyone know, if you get into the guidance and you start to look at it and you find yourself having a couple more questions on a topic, or you need a clarification for any of the guidance, just hit the Contact Us SCMH box. It'll pick up the page you're on, but it may not pick up the actual topic within the subject. So please just type in, what your question is, what's guidance you're speaking of, and then send that to us, and I'll try to get the answer to you, or I'll find one of the experts that wrote it to respond directly to you. Okay, so